One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's Bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to crystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the past. This is probably going to sound a little strange, but just bear with me for a second, because I just want to tell you, I'm just not the type of person that likes to dig around in things that I created a few years ago unless there's a really specific reason, right? I'm not going back and listening to every single podcast episode I've ever created, or watching every YouTube video, or reading my old emails. And I think that this surprises a lot of people. They're like, wait, you don't reuse your old content? You don't go back and use it in different ways? I mean, yeah, you can. There's some really cool things. We've talked about repurposing many times here on the podcast, but I want to specifically talk about using your podcast backlog strategically today. Yes, all that hard work that you've put in the episodes that you've already created, or if you're just getting started, I want you to be thinking about these things now, because this will actually make your life a lot easier in the months and the years to come. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Crystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, I'm getting all fired up today. I'm getting extra comfortable in my chair. I got my iced coffee because I'm recording in the afternoon today. And I'm just really excited because I want you to think about your content in a way of not only producing something one time and you hit publish and then that's it, right? If you've been around here for a while, we try to get as much legwork, like what's the saying? I see again with Crystal and her terrible metaphors. If you're brand new around here, welcome, get used to them. I say analogies wrong all the time, but I'm sitting here thinking like you want to get the most mileage as you can out of one piece of content, specifically one podcast episode, because it is a long form piece of content. Typically, the episodes that I record on this show are anywhere from like 15 to 25 minutes up to an hour and a half long. So I want to make sure that what I produce is something that I can refer back, like people back to over and over again in the future. But also I'm already thinking about how can I formulate this into something that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Oh, I was about to give it away, but we're not quite there yet, because I just want to get into ways that you can use your podcast content that's already published in a brand new way. So honestly, this doesn't even matter because I know that there's a lot of brand new podcasters in this community. Hi, shout out. I know that you're there and you haven't even launched your podcast yet. And you're like, Crystal, how does this relate to me? I just want you sitting back and listening to the strategy. So when it's been 6 months and you've been at your podcast, you're going to come back to this episode, listen to it again and say, oh, I see now. Okay, yes, this is smart. This is how I want to rework my episodes and use them in this strategic way. But even if you've only been podcasting for 2 months, you can use the strategies that we're talking about today. If you've been podcasting for 6 months or 2 years, even better, you're actually going to have a lot of great content already in your back pocket that you can use. So I already know that there's going to be a few options that you can use on how you can start with old pieces of content that you believed performed really well. And you can kind of choose like what performs, like I'm saying that in air quotes, like performed really well. What does that necessarily mean? Does that mean that it got the most downloads? Does that mean people were screenshotting it and talking about it on Instagram, or people were, putting a whole bunch of comments whenever you put up an audiogram on Facebook? Like, I'm going to leave that up to you to judge how well an episode performed, because it's going to be different for everybody. Because maybe you're like, well, I'm only on Twitter and that's the only place where I interact with my people. Well, then maybe reach out on Twitter and ask them like, hey, I saw that this was the most downloaded episode. What did you love about it? There's all kinds of different ways that you can engage with your audience, but I really want to talk about how I've been able to do this with pieces of content, and then I'm going to give you some options for how you can use the episodes you already have very strategically, right? This is your podcast backlog. That's what we're going to call it. So if you're like, what is a backlog? That means anything that you've published to date. So like I said, brand new podcasters, this won't apply to you, but if you've been doing this for at least 2 months, there's a good chance that you can use some of the strategies that we're going to talk about today. Even if you can't use them immediately, you'll be able to use them very soon. So I wanted to give you an example from my own content journey, and that is how I use spin-off pieces of content for my YouTube channel. Like I take pieces of this podcast and I use it for my YouTube channel. So I'm trying to think of, let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning. I should like insert like birds chirping or something. Y'all know we're not fancy on the production side around here. Just imagine that there's birds chirping, singing. It's a glorious day. It's the genesis moment of this beautiful podcast. And I was just creating content that was a lot of interviews. And then I thought, maybe I should put these on YouTube. So I did. I don't recommend it. It was not something that my YouTube audience really cared about, because it's not like today's video podcast where it's like, oh, you can see me and the other person. Like it was literally just my podcast artwork for The Rookie Life, the original name of this podcast. And it was just the artwork and it was me talking. I don't even think I had a waveform. Like there was no audiogram, like a wave bouncing across the screen to let you know that there was even talking. It was just the artwork and audio in the background. Yeah, it was pretty bad. It's pretty bad. But you know what? You make mistakes and you learn. That's the only way that we get better, right? Keep it up. We all got to start somewhere. So this was my somewhere that I started. Terrible mistake. But whenever I was ready to get more serious about YouTube, so I did the Rookie Life podcast for about 10 months, and then I rebranded to the Profit Podcast. And that's when I went all in. Like, it was for the last 2 years, we have been talking about nothing but podcasting. And that's crazy. We're actually coming up on the 2-year anniversary. So I guess it's just shy of 2 years because it was May 7th, May 5th, May 7th, somewhere around there. That's when we launched the official trailer of the Profit Podcast. I made a big announcement that we were switching. And so whenever I did that, I also thought, okay, I'm going to go all in on podcasting, but podcasting, like, there's just some pieces of it that need to be visual, right? Like, you need to see a tutorial of how to edit your podcast or how Buzzsprout works. Like, there's a lot of nuances that go into explaining something just in a podcast episode. Like, I felt like things needed to be visual. So whenever I decided to get serious about my YouTube channel, which was last January was when I went all in and said, I'm going to publish 2 videos a week for the end of time, basically. Like, that was my commitment. I'm like, I'm going to publish 2 YouTube episodes or videos every single week, no matter what, right? Come hell or high water, I'm putting out 2 episodes a week. But it kind of made me nervous. It like scared me a little bit because I'm like, wait, what am I supposed to talk about? What am I supposed to talk about on these YouTube videos? Because I was new to YouTube. I mean, I had done it.
Being a woman in business comes with its own unique set of challenges, but also so many opportunities. We get ahead by leaning in to what makes us different from business as usual. I'm Samantha Hartley, host of Profitable Joyful Consulting, inviting you to a special 6-episode series exploring the experience of being a woman in business. You want to hear from women consultants who've hit $1 million, who sell 6-figure engagements, or who've broken their own revenue ceilings? Yeah, those are my clients, and they'll be sharing too. Join me for 6 must-listen episodes that tackle key challenges for women consultants. Follow Profitable Joyful Consulting on your favorite podcast app.
Unsuccessfully for a while. I had tried some things. I'd tried to do some quirky videos and just things that did not work out well. So whenever I was looking at creating like a content calendar for YouTube, I thought, well, I've already published a lot of episodes, right? Because we had switched to the Profit Podcast in May. And now, mind you, this was May 2019. And then in January 2020 is when I made that commitment to go all in. So from May to January, there was a lot of content. That was a lot of time to pass of me producing regular, consistent content. So whenever I went to go all in on YouTube, I went back to my podcast backlog. Basically, this is a really long story. I'm just now realizing, like, you could have wrapped this up in about 2 sentences, but here we are. Here we are, about 2 minutes into this story. But I went back to my podcast backlog and I said, what are my most popular episodes? That's where I need to start. I need to start with the ones that I already know are successful, the ones that had the most downloads, the ones that I had the most visits to my website, and the ones that were fun for me to make. Like, that's another factor, right? It's not just about popularity and the most downloads. It's also, well, is that something that you want to continue to talk about, right? Because you'll notice on my YouTube channel, I don't particularly talk a lot about editing. And that is simply because I don't do a lot of editing and I don't really care to be the go-to podcast editing expert. No, thank you. I don't want that title. Like, please and thank you. Go away. I'm good. But I did go back into my podcast backlog whenever I started YouTube. And then I just started creating spin-off pieces of content. And you may even notice if you follow this podcast and my YouTube channel, most of the content really coincides with one another. I will line up my podcast calendar with my YouTube calendar and say, okay, if I'm talking about this on the podcast this week, then I should probably talk about that on the YouTube channel, or a form of that, or just one piece of that. So this is already a few ways that you can think about your content and how you can use what you've already published and use it in a new way, right? This is repurposing on the most basic level, but I want you to start thinking about your episodes you've already published and say, how can I get more mileage out of this? Another cool thing that's really awesome for SEO purposes is whenever I publish an episode and I'm thinking of an episode that's in my backlog, I will mention it on the podcast, and then I will link to it in the podcast show notes. Now, I don't want to go down an SEO rabbit hole. This is search engine optimization for anybody that's not familiar. So SEO is how your podcast or your website pages rank on Google. Well, the more links that you have to your own stuff, it's going to help your website rank higher when people search for whatever it is your topic is about. So I love to mention old episodes of the podcast in current episodes because it reminds you that, oh yeah, we had this is a great conversation that we had like with this one guest, or we had a returning guest and their message really coincided with this one. So you should probably it's kind of like a spider web of content and you want everything to go back to each other. One episode I'm thinking of in particular, and we'll use this as an example, I'll link to it in the show notes, is Tashi. So shout out Tashi. She's in our Facebook group. She was asking, how do you celebrate your podcast milestones? And I was like, we have a podcast episode about that. It's here. And I just linked to the podcast episode. So I want you to get the most mileage out of your episodes. Like when people ask you questions, isn't that the reason why you created a podcast? You don't have to repeat yourself over and over and over again. So if you already taught a lesson, or, you went through a step-by-step process in another podcast episode, don't go through the entire process again in your current episode. Just mention it and say where people can go listen to it. You can link to it in your show notes for your current episode, or you could have, some other way whenever you publish it, hey, make sure you go listen to this episode too. These kind of go hand in hand. So I hope that makes sense, but I definitely want you linking back to old episodes in your show notes because that really, really helps your SEO for your website. Now, I wanted to tell you a few other fun ways that you can use your backlog of episodes. Some of these I've tried, some of these I've seen other people try, but I just wanted to give you some examples of, like I said, some fun ways that you can do it. So number one is you can make a database for your audience with clickable links for your episodes. Now, I actually have this for my Potty People. So shout out members of the Potty People. You know who you are. But I have a database of all the podcasts we've ever published, and it's in a Google Sheet. And what we'll do, my project manager, she'll go and update it from time to time, once a quarter, once a month. And what it is basically someone could go in, type the Control F, like the, find key, and they could type in whatever subject that they're searching about. I'm searching about podcast titles, or I want to look up show notes, and they could type in those words and they would find every episode of the Profit Podcast and clickable links for it. So I think that this is something that could be a really cool freebie, right? Everyone's always asking me about lead magnets and growing their email list. This is one thing that I think would be really cool, is to have a database for your audience with clickable links to your episode. Now, the second thing, like a fun way to use your backlog, is you could also create PDFs with curated playlist that you can use as a lead magnet. Now, what would this look like, right? So you could go into a Word document, a Google document, or into a publishing tool like Canva and create like a fun graphic or like a fun document. And it's saying, hey, if you're brand new to podcasting, Here is a playlist of the most important episodes you need to listen to, all about interviewing, or all about equipment, or all about setting up your website, whatever. I could do this in like 50 different ways, but I think it would be really cool for those of you that have been podcasting for a while to set up a playlist, because this will actually help you get more downloads, believe it or not. Like, it's not always about cranking out the content and creating more content. You can get more downloads for your podcast just by linking to the backlog of episodes that you already have. So you could create this as a lead magnet, or you could just create the file and put it on your website. You could share it on social media. Like, there's so many different things that you could do, but I really like this idea of creating these curated playlists that you could use to give to your audience. Okay, number 3, you can use the content you've already created and repurpose it for another platform. Now, we were talking about earlier my really bad attempt at doing this on YouTube. Like, I still think that there's very cool ways that you can repurpose stuff. But what I like to do is I will, from time to time, look at my podcast downloads. So if you're a Buzzsprout user, shout out, isn't Buzzsprout amazing? If you have no idea what I'm talking about, this is my podcast hosting provider. It's where I upload my audio files to go out to Apple Podcast, all the players, all the places. And you can learn more by going to crystalprofit.com/Buzzsprout. I'm an affiliate with them. I've been with them since day one. They are incredible. They're amazing. But if you were in your Buzzsprout account, you could go to the stats section and then go to episode downloads. And then in episode downloads, it gives you the option, like there's like a chart, and it'll tell you, over the last 7 days, how many downloads of which episodes have gotten. Ignore that for now. I want you to go down below there, and you can sort all of your episodes by date published or by popularity, and you'll be able to tell what are your top 10 episodes or your top 20 episodes, right? And this is how you could create your playlist, or this is how you can say, man, this one episode performed so well. Maybe I should create a spin-off piece of content. Maybe it was a 4-step process, and I could grab one step out of that episode and just go really, really deep with it. I do this all the time, y'all. I do this all the time. This was the early days of right after I rebranded to the Profit Podcast, and I was talking about launching. I wanted to break down, okay, well, here's everything you need to know about launching a podcast. And I kind of shoved it all into one episode. And then I was like, I really just need to talk about the launch plan. Okay, so let me go back, and because how to launch a podcast was one of my most downloaded episodes. So what I did is, over the course of the next few months, I took pieces of that episode and created other spin-off pieces of content that were their own episodes. I did one all about how to create a launch plan. I did one all about picking your podcast launch date. Like, there was some really broken down, let's get in the nitty-gritty of each one of these topics. And I think that those performed really well. It was great to have one place to send someone that's brand new to thinking about launching. And then I could send them there, oh, you need to listen to how to launch a podcast. But then they also had options of oh, I just need to zero in on my launch strategy. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe she has an episode just about my launch date and how to pick it. By the way, I'm going to have all of the episodes I'm talking about. If you're listening, you're like, oh, I need to listen to that. I need that. I want that right now. I'm going to link to all of them in the show notes. So the show notes for this episode are crystalprofit.com/247. That's where you're going to see everything that we've talked about here today about using your podcast backlog. But I really just want to wrap up with, like I said, I want you to use the incredible content that you've already created and get the most mileage out of it. You don't just have to have a one-hit wonder, amazing podcast that just really took off, just one episode that you're so proud of, but it'll never happen again. No, I create spin-off pieces of content all the time. All the time. I actually thought about this particular podcast episode today, talking about my backlog, when I was looking at, oh my gosh, like y'all, I have 247 episodes of this podcast. That's not including bonuses, because the bonuses don't even get a number. So I have like more than 250 episodes of this podcast. And I asked myself, am I using them all strategically? Am I going back and taking ideas and like reiterating, or like, things have changed. Like so much has changed in the short 2 years since this podcast like first came into existence. And I like to go back and see like, oh, I was wrong about this one concept, or, oh, I can make that episode better. I know I can. So I want you to constantly be looking at your content. How can you make it better? How can you reuse something that you've already created? And at the end of the day, the smartest way to keep really creating that great content and sending it to your audience is to figure out what's working for them already and capitalize on that. Constantly be looking at your numbers, know what's working, and ask your audience, why is this working? Why do you want to hear this? Like, it surprises me all the time that the Office Ladies case study is still one of our most downloaded episodes. And it's kind of a mystery to me as why. I don't know if it's because it's got really great SEO. I don't know if it's because y'all just love a good case study, or I have a bunch of fans of The Office here, but the other episodes that are there always make a lot of sense for me. That's just the one that always kind of throws me off. And maybe y'all are telling me y'all want to see more case study episodes. And if that's the case, reach out to me, send me a DM and say, Crystal, I want to know how this podcast does it. Like, do some research, go all geeky and nerd out on all the things that they do behind the scenes, because we want to know. If that's you, don't hesitate to reach out, okay? Like, because we can absolutely have this conversation, but I want you delivering value every time you show up behind the microphone. I want you to make your content better and better every single time and gain the momentum to really keep delivering that value to your audience every single week. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you go check out the show notes. Go see all the episodes we talked about here today, crystalprofit.com/episode 247. And if this is your first time tuning in, I'm so happy that you're here and you're part of this community. Make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to this episode. And don't forget that we have our review contest coming up. It is so close. I can taste it. If you want to learn more about the review contest that we're doing, it is only for April 2021. So if you're listening to this in the future, I am so sorry, but you've missed the train. It has left the station. But at the end of April 2021, we're having a huge review contest. You can learn more about it by going to crystalprofit.com/review. crystalprofit.com/review. There's also going to be a link in the show notes, but that's all I have for you. So as always, remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Crystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous. Or if you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now and it will say, send Crystal a text message. And I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of Fan Mail Shoutouts.